Howdy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Jerry even put a tie on for us.
Nope, just a coat.
Well, you're really little, so it looks like a tie. It's hard to tell. You just see the collar and the shirt there. So I was kind of hoping you'd show up with like a heart tie. See, here we go. I'm missing here. That. Did you light any cars on fire Monday, Felipe? Did all the palm trees survive?
They did. My neighbor is a matter of public record. He's a government employee, but he buys a cannon and they never come to his house. These are like watching the Santa Fe fireworks. Loud and probably $5,000 to $8,000 worth of fireworks. But we had fun.
Oh, see, now you should have had him come shoot those at my house before I sold the RV, and with Hope laying on top of it, and I could have got the insurance check.
Well, see, you don't know how to do it. You get a neighbor to do that you don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I probably would have got a lot more than the insurance money I got selling it.
I don't know, Brian, new is a new used. I mean, used is a new. What is it? Used is a new.
Oh, it's horrible. I had to like break my cardinal rule of all things automotive. I had no choice but to buy a new car because no matter where I went, the used cars 3 years old cost the same or more than the same thing new. And I just hate buying new cars because, you know, depreciation, and I'm cheap, but I literally couldn't find anything that wasn't more expensive.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, Chair Rogers.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, as we ready to get started? Lynn, could you walk us through a roll call?
Yes, so we'll start with you, Chair Rogers,
Present.
Trustee Benavides.
Here.
Trustee Ramaker could not be here today. Trustee Waugh,
Here.
Trustee Wilson.
Here.
You do have a quorum, and for the record, Trustee Ortiz is in attendance as well.
Thank you here.
All right, thank you. And then do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
No, there's no public comment yet.
All right. Then we'll move to, do we have a motion to accept the agenda as presented?
So moved.
We have a second?
So second, Kelly Benavides.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All right, those opposed? All right, the motion carries. We have an approved agenda. So we will roll right into new business where we will get an update on the district's financial operations from Floresto, and this is for discussion only. So Floresto, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. One more time for the record, I'm Floresto Caballas, CFO for the district. And I will share my screen here. So we're looking at the presentation. With the district's fiscal year ending on June 30th, we thought this was a good time to give the Finance and Audit Committee an update of where we stand as of now. And we will start with the consolidated sales tax. Most of our reports are as of June 24th because that was the cutoff for reporting for our July board meeting. But we did manage to receive our June 30th consolidated sales tax, which is revenues collected in the month of April 2022. So there's a 2-month lag between when sales tax revenues are generated and when we receive them. And you can see here for April that the increase for the CTX we received is 11% higher than the same month from prior year. And there was also an 11% increase in March of 2022 compared to prior year. And in any given year or period, that's a very good positive sign of the direction consolidated sales taxes are going. The only reason we scrutinize it more today is, as you can see, from July to 2021 through February 2022, we were averaging an increase of 26%. And it became clear in hindsight that stimulus was continuing to wind its way through the economy. Consumers were building up savings, and when restrictions lifted, there was definitely the release of pent-up demand that everyone was expecting. But what we all may not have been expecting is the extent to which that demand and the ability of the consumers to engage in discretionary spending were going to result in what we see here, very large increases. But as discussions about inflation, potential job losses, a potential recession have arisen, or at least the concerns of them, it seems as though consumers are tightening their belt or holding off on further discretionary spending just to see how the economy evolves. So we are seeing that here. But again, even though we're going from 26% increases to 11%, we still expect to finish the fiscal year strong as far as consolidated sales tax revenues. And we expect the same thing with property tax revenues. And this is our largest source of revenue. So this is even more critical. And as we've seen throughout the pandemic, this tax revenue has been very stable. You can see here that we're looking at $53.7 million of actual collections through June 24th, which is really reflective of what we're going to collect through June 30th. That's basically the property taxes for fiscal year 2022. And you can also see the budget, which is $53.1 million. So we're already $600,000 or so over the budget. And the increase is over what we expect to receive, the budget. is usually due to new property coming online at 100% of their assessed value during the year. So that's not really surprising to us. And going back to fiscal year 2021, we're just showing the trend here that even through the pandemic and the height of the pandemic, really in 2021, property tax revenues have continued to increase. And I'm sure we're all aware of why it's been an unusual, scenario throughout these last 2 years where, basic economics, supply and demand have really caused property values to increase. And that is really surprising, the extent of that. And we also note that the 2023 budgeted property tax revenues are $59.2 million. And at 11% increase, that bodes well for the district going forward. And we also discuss from year to year how property taxes are assessed and levied as of July 1st. So we know that we expect to collect the $59 million in the next fiscal year. And really, even if there was a correction or a fluctuation up or down in property tax values in the short term, that the district would not see the impact of that for 1 or 2 fiscal years. So we are comfortable with our revenue position in the short term, and really, unless something drastically changes, and it's hard to imagine that conditions can get any more extreme than what we saw over the last couple of years, especially with the optimistic view of lots of large projects coming online over the next few years, not to mention events like the Super Bowl is a great example of positive news and expectations that we have going forward, regardless of what may happen in the short term with consumer spending or property values. Moving on to expenditures, this is the area of the district's financials that we can control. And starting with salaries and benefits, here's a comparison of where we are as of June 24th compared to the budget. And currently we are $9 million under the budget, but we expect once year-end adjustments are all said and done, that we will be closer to $7 million in savings under salaries and benefits. And the primary reason for those savings is that the district budgets at 100% of where all positions are filled. And we know there is a vacancy factor where not every position is filled, and especially not throughout the fiscal year. So we do expect savings from year to year, but the way we've managed filling vacancies and going all the way back to freezing those vacancies at the beginning of the pandemic has generated significant salary savings that will really contribute to future projects for the district.
Forrester, could I jump in?
Sure.
And going back to the CTX and the property tax, I know that on the CTX, we're currently we're about, I think you said about 600,000 positive, or was that for the property tax? But my question is more so, given that we're trending to bring in more revenue from those 2 sources than we had budgeted in FY22, have you determined or estimated what the actual additional revenue is above what we budgeted?
For fiscal year 2022, assuming that these trends hold, that we continue to collect at least 10% or so increases for the remaining of fiscal 22, that would get us to about $29 million. And that's a large increase compared to what we actually received in fiscal year 2021. But for fiscal year 2022, our budget was actually $23.5 million. That's a projection from the state of Nevada, and will far exceed that even at $29 million, where until recently, we were actually on track to receive closer to $30 million or more. So that is declining, but we are looking good compared to the current year budget, even with this continuing the trend down. And we're keeping a close eye on that going into fiscal year 2023, because this trend could continue and we'll have to be prepared for that.
And so just to summarize, so for the CTX, we could be looking at perhaps upwards of a $5 million higher actual revenue coming in from CTX. And then if you could maybe answer the same question for the property tax projection.
Yes, property tax revenues are much more reliable. I pointed out here in this slide that even during the pandemic and at the height of it, where one would assume that taxpayers would have a more difficult time making their tax payments, we haven't seen that. There weren't much in the form of delinquencies, And as you can see in fiscal year 22, at least, we actually collected more than what we had budgeted. And the same may be the case next year as well. At the very least, even if we don't exceed the $59.2 million that we're expecting in 2023, well, I meant to say that even if we don't expect to collect more like we did in fiscal 22, we should collect at least the $59.2 million. You know, that's due regardless of economic conditions, and taxpayers have shown an ability to make their payments. So we would expect at the very least to receive the $59 million in next fiscal year, just like we received at least the $53 million and more in the current fiscal year.
So just to clarify, so for the property taxes, 53 million, the 53,774, there is no more money to collect on property tax for this FY22, or are there still any months to collect on, similar to the CTX?
There is a minimal amount that will be trickling in over the summer, but this is the largest apportionments have already been received. We usually collect most of our property taxes by April of that fiscal year. And so that's what this represents. There may be a couple 100,000 more when we make our year-end adjustments, but that would bring us closer to $54 million. But this is representative of our property taxes for the current fiscal year.
Okay, I'm just, for my own notes, I'm just gonna put maybe 0.8 million above actuals, above our projection for revenue. Okay.
Yes, that's a good number.
So maybe, so we're positive about 5.8 million across the CTX and the property tax on revenue for the FY22.
For FY22, yes. There doesn't seem to be anything indicating that the consolidated sales tax revenue would fall any further. In fact, I pointed out that these are 11% increases, which is very positive. So
Correct.
An additional 5 million there, and we are roughly $1 million over in property tax revenues for the current fiscal year.
Okay. Okay, now I can better process on the expense side now to also add those savings to my notes.
Yes. So compared to budget, we are seeing savings on the expenditure side too. And I just went over salaries and benefits. The primary reason for those savings is holding vacancies and filling those positions based on operation and business needs. In supplies and services.
Look, Florista,
Yes.
before we get too far away from it, I just had a really quick question on the property tax part of it. So because, I know the assessor saw a lot of people trying to correct their category, primary residence and everything like that. When you talk about corrections, are you expecting that this rush of people trying to reduce their property tax from 9% to 3% is not going to make that big of a difference come next year when they would be paying on their taxes?
No, that's a great point, Trustee Wah. When we talk about a correction, I was actually referring to property values declining. And for me, I gauge a correction as somewhere around 10%. I don't think any analysts out there are expecting a crash. But if anything, we may expect a correction of approximately 5 to 10%, hopefully not more, in property values. So that would result in less property tax revenues for the district. But that would be going forward. Again, the property taxes values have been assessed and taxes have been levied for fiscal year 2023. And really, much of those taxes have been calculated for fiscal year 2024. So when I refer to a correction, meaning a decline in assessed values, that would be a decrease potentially in property tax revenues for the district in the future. But you do make a good point about what we've seen with the corrections for the individual taxpayer with identifying their primary residence for purposes of the tax caps. So their primary residence would be capped at a 3% increase versus an 8% increase otherwise. And I do find it interesting in that for those taxpayers who did not make that correction timely, they would be paying more property taxes than maybe they should have. And the unexpected or unfortunate benefit for some local government agencies is that that's more revenues that'll be collected. That's a downside for the consumer, but it actually will contribute to higher revenues for agencies or local governments like ours.
But do you anticipate, or has the assessor's office shared, because obviously if it's very small a number of taxpayers who are doing this, then it's not that big of an issue. But do you how do you anticipate in future fiscal years how that, people realizing that, hey, I've been paying too much and then correcting that? Do you anticipate that being a large swing, or is it just kind of not going to be that big of a deal?
For our purposes, at $59.2 million in property tax revenues, that would likely have a minimal impact, and even a more minimal impact on larger entities. And actually, I would say that even for smaller entities, that wouldn't have a significant impact. And my understanding also is that assuming that the assessor's deadline was a hard deadline, that would have to be corrected going forward. So for property taxes levied currently, that would still be due from taxpayers in the given fiscal year. But going forward, if that was corrected, that would have a small impact on property tax revenues declining. But because property values are likely to continue increasing, the district would still see increases, and we likely would not be able to tell a difference in those corrections going forward.
Thank you.
I believe I left off with services and supplies expenditures. What I was pointing out in the salaries and benefits expenditure categories is happening here too. The district knows what programs it wants to provide and other services we want to make available to our customers, and we budget accordingly at 100% of our expectations. But if we don't need certain services to carry out those functions, we experience savings, and we do see that every year. But our supplies and services expenditures are much closer to budget than we would normally see with salaries and benefits. And you can see here that currently we are $3 million under the budget. And by year end, when we make our final adjustments for audit purposes, we expect to be closer to $2.5 million in total savings.
And then have we experienced more on the supplies and service that we're fully operational now from coming out of the pandemic?
We have been opening and providing more services as restrictions have been lifting, and we expect to continue doing that into next fiscal year. But we are continuing to fully open, so to say. So
we're sort of not fully operational on the supplies and services side to pre-pandemic levels yet. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, that's accurate. And the committee will see a difference if we were to compare the 2023 budget, that there are larger increases from fiscal year 2022 to 2023 for that reason.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that for me.
You're welcome. Capital outlay, this represents our library meeting materials. And again, we talk about this with the budget every year. It's a calculation of 15% of total expenditures. So that resulted in a budget of $10.7 million for 2022. We're currently at $9 million, but collection and bibliographic services works hard this time of the year to determine what materials were received by June 30th, and that'll determine what our final expenditure will be in this area. And we expect that to be closer to a savings of $300,000 versus about $1.8 million where we stand now. There really is a large amount of materials that arrive close to year end, and usually by mid-July, we have an idea of where we stand as of June 30th. And so we expect to save approximately $300,000 there. I want to take this opportunity to update the Finance and Audit Committee about more procedures that financial services is performing, especially since we are transitioning to new auditors for the fiscal year 2022 audit. We thought this was a good time to return to a lot of the procedures we performed in prior years over areas such as cash handling. This would be an example of a financial control, since cash is related to the financial statements and our reporting of them. And I just presented a summary here of procedures we performed and our conclusion. I'll provide more detail in board reports going forward as soon as the August board meeting to show exactly what procedures we performed at which locations or departments and the results of those reviews. And along with these types of financial controls over cash, of course, we are also performing operational controls that are not necessarily required for financial statement reporting purposes. And as an example, I use financial services. This is not necessarily a financial control that would be required for financial reporting purposes. The procedures I summarized here, performing reconciliations, inventories, and other observations, is something we do really for management review purposes to ensure that the operations, whether it's financial services or another department or function, is not only performing satisfactorily, but is performing at an optimal level. And that's the goal of these controls. And here in operations, we are developing an audit plan that will eventually cover not only all of the library branches, but all of the departments, including financial services. Financial services is already reviewed and audited by our independent auditors. And the auditors are also concerned with operations in certain areas, but different departments are also subject to audits and reviews by different agencies. An example I can think of is our literacy program. The Nevada State Department of Education has certain guidelines and requirements they must comply with, and they look to entities like ours who have federal funds that flow through to our operations to ensure that not only does the Department of Education comply with requirements, that the library district also complies with those grant requirements. So that's an example of a financial review, not necessarily capturing those kinds of procedures, but where financial services can help, fill that role in ensuring that all of our operations are complying with the interests of any particular agency or organizations that would like to see us being in compliance with what they're looking for.
And then thank you for that. And one of the things I'm glad you said,
I have a question.
in subsequent meetings, I definitely will be very interested. And I was going to ask that question after you finished, and you answered it though. But I would like to better understand at maybe a subsequent meeting, the scope of your cash review, and then operational control, just to see the scope of that. And then also looking at, how many actual transactions that you look at. And I'm sure that I will suspect that even though from your observations, things may be in line, but I'm sure there were probably some findings or recommendations that you probably observed. So it would be great to just get a high level summary from that, to hear from you. Even though your conclusion may still be the same, but I would still be interested to hear some of the things that you did find through those reviews. Then the other thing I'll be interested to share with the audit committee would be, just like you just described, these external reviews that are happening based on funding sources. If you could just maybe compile a list of those so that we could get a sense of what other external audits are taking place. And then certainly when they come to do an audit, it would be great for us to start here to see what their they do the management letter or of their recommendations or conclusion, to have that also be a part of our agenda and discussion prior to going to the full board, if that's possible.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chair. We'll do that and report to the executive director, and then subsequently to the Finance and Audit Committee and the full board. And as you mentioned, we do have detail now, and I can tell you, at least at this point, that the branches and departments we've worked with so far have been doing a good job. We have a broad conclusion here, but the reports we'll start providing will show the details you requested, and we'll continue to fine tune that information too, along with the other information you asked for.
Okay, thank you. And I see that Trustee Ortiz has his hand up, and then also Executive Director Watson. So I recognize you too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Felipe Ortiz for the record. Just so I don't, this is a better place. Floresto, that's still not clear. Is it a self-reporting audit and you just get it? Or do you go in and look at, I'm talking about the performance portion. Do you go in and look at that, pick one a year, two a year, or is it a self-reporting for every library or grant or operation? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, as far as, I'm sorry, Trustee Ortiz.
This is before the actual auditors look at that. Are you looking at it because they self-reported, or are you looking at it because you're taking at random a different section to look at.
As far as
Thank you,
yes, as far as self-reporting goes, we are interested in that as management, and because we're sure that this Finance and Audit Committee meeting and the board is interested in those results and how we're operating as well. We're working with the administration team to develop an overall audit plan for operational controls that are going to identify major risks, and it will be those functional areas that would know best where their risks are. And so we'll be working in conjunction with all of the department heads throughout the district to develop a plan that assures all interested parties that operations are performing as expected. And financial services will be playing the role of observing either periodically or, spot checking randomly to ensure that, we're providing the proper training, staff and their teams are performing the procedures as expected. And that'll prepare us for external reviews, whether it's the financial statement auditors or other agencies that I mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That answers my question.
Thank you.
Executive
All right,
Director
recognizing,
Kelvin Watson for the record. So I just wanted to also add that this is something that I asked our Floresto and his team to perform using a model that we used at my previous employer, which was the county, where we had financial services go out actually to the branches to Chair Rogers' point, using a checklist to understand, make sure that for cash handling purposes, we're following the processes. And then we would, at my previous employer, we would then take that report from financial services and actually submit that to actually the county auditor. So it was a way of us actually not the branch actually reporting on what they did, but actually financial services serving as our auditor and control through this process. So that's what I'm working with financial services and Floresto on to implement for the library district.
all right, thank you, Executive Director Watson. And I thought I saw another hand up. It said Brittany's iPhone, I thought it said.
Mr. Chair, I'll ask a question if Brittany isn't ready. I suppose this is for Director Watson. So as you're going through and doing these branch level spot checks, do you anticipate these being used, in instances for possible disciplinary purposes as the need comes about, or just kind of training opportunities and things like that?
It's training opportunities, Trustee Waugh. It's not for discipline. It's to make sure, again, to the point where we are reviewing our operations and our cash handling procedures, where we are reporting. And I think Chair Rogers said it. We will have the findings, but then also talk about what we did to fix those things. But so no, this is not for disciplinary purposes. This is about training and making sure that we have the internal controls that we need to have in place for our programs, our services, we're inventorying our resources that we have, as well. But certainly if we see something in these, during these audits where there is something above and beyond mistakes, where we find someone that is actually doing something, certainly we'll take actions accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that's a great approach, because we do something similar in my organization, and a lot of it is more so about just making sure that you have the proper internal controls as you described. And I think secondarily, just helping to affirm that your policies and procedures are current and reflect how you actually do business, so that when you do have an external review or audit come in, they will ask you, hey, what are your current internal controls? What are you doing? It just sort of helps you be better prepared and to give you a more positive optics to the external reviewer when they come in, and then also to just help make sure that you're staying audit ready for the most part, so to reduce any findings that they may have too. So I support the effort, and certainly anything that I can lend my expertise and experience in, I can definitely do that and willing to do that. So, and then for Resto, and then also go ahead.
I just want to really quick thank Director Watson for the answer, because I know, as you know, and many people probably know, is whenever something you hear, there's going to be kind of these checks, and the rumor mill goes into overdrive, and so I just wanted to thank you for taking the opportunity to clarify that, so kind of head off any kind of unfounded concerns that may come about from this.
And then I did want to just pivot back to the financial side quickly. And I didn't get a chance to say it, but I know I was just sort of adding all the numbers, the savings up and the revenue above projections. And I'm showing that we're sort of north of 15 million or trending to be north of 15 million, looking at the additional revenue and then also the savings across the expense categories. Is that?
Yes, that's accurate. Yes, no, that's accurate, Mr. Chair. Those numbers, along with savings from previous years, is what led to a transfer of $34 million to the capital projects fund in next fiscal year to support large projects. And that's where the district has really done a good job across the board, because we're transferring funds that can support major projects in upcoming years while maintaining a healthy fund balance, ending fund balance, in case we do experience any more economic challenges down the road.
Yeah, I appreciate the effort and the report, and certainly the work that you're doing under the direction of Director Watson. So I love it when we're positive and in the black on the budget, especially be that much over. So great work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that was all the information we're presenting today, unless the committee had any other questions.
No further questions for me. I don't believe I see any hands raised. So let me get back to the agenda. Bear with me for 1 minute. My laptop has more limited real estate on it, so I have to close windows to see other windows. So I'm just trying to get back to where we should be on the agenda. Okay, so I'll go back to Lynn to see if we have any public comment.
We do not have any public comment.
All right, well, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, we are officially adjourned. Thank everyone for taking time from your schedules to join us and share and comment and lend your expertise in our finance and audit matters. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Rogers.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.